I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Hundred Years' War and a very famous person who fought in the Hundred Years' War. Her name was Joan of Arc. We do know that the French knights were using the crossbow and English archers were using the longbow, and the English archers were kicking their butts. If you look at this slide and you look somewhere around 12 o'clock, you can see Cressy. If you go about, I don't know, 12:30, 1 o'clock, you can see Agincourt. And both of those battles, huge battles and huge wins for the English, just smashing the French. As you can see, the English controlled the whole northern part of which is modern-day France. You can see that there's a place called Burgundy that is controlling part of France and part of modern-day Germany as well. And then also look where Bordeaux is, and that's along the western coast of France. And remember, Bordeaux is the place where Mars and Pipot and Jean-Paul and Guillemette are from. That was under control with the English as well. So the English controlled large parts of France because of their success in the Hundred Years' War, mainly due to the longbow. The French were in trouble, and they needed a hero. And actually, they got a heroine, which is a with an E at the end, not the drug, which is the female version of a hero. And her name is Joan of Arc. She only lived to be 19 years old. She became a saint in the Roman Catholic Church in 1920, and she's one of only 3 patron saints of France. You can see the problem with the English. The English controlled large northern part of France, including the modern-day capital of Paris, and then as you can see, the bottom left-hand corner of, the southwestern corner of France as well. So the English controlled big chunks of France. They were kicking the French's butt in the Hundred Years' War. And there was a lot of trouble. There was insanity going with the French royal family. There were murders. There were assassinations. There were still remnants of the bubonic plague. And the king died. And when the king died, before they could coronate any of his sons, 4 of them died. He had 5 sons. The youngest one was named Charles the 7th. He was only 14 years old, and 4 of his older brothers died. So he was not ready to become king, so the title that he took was called the Dauphin, Dauphin, which means heir to the throne. Eventually, he's going to be crowned the king. However, it is not safe for the Dauphin to travel around France because of the English armies being occupying the land. And so Charles the Seventh is in a bad place at the time. And the English king, whose name is Henry V, took really great advantage of the turmoil to invade France, and he's going to try to end this once and for all. And we know that the English defeated the French at every turn. Well, the French believed in a prophecy, and a prophecy is a statement from a higher being or a statement that is believed to be true. And the prophecy that was going around France was that a young maiden would save France from the English. And a young maiden came along. Joan of Arc lived in a town called Lorraine. Her parents were peasant farmers, and she claimed to start hearing voices of saints and God when she was 12 years old, working alone in the fields. This is a National Historic Monument in France. It is in the village of Lorraine, which is still there, and this is believed to be Joan of Arc's home, where she lived. She claimed that when the voices left her, she cried because they were so beautiful. Apparently, the voices of the saints and God told her to drive the English out of France, and then also to coronate the Dauphin and make Charles VII the king of France. So she goes to a place called Chinon, France, and this is where the Dauphin was hiding out. There is some remnants of the castle still there that are National Historic Monuments as well. And, Charles was already a little bit leery. Number one, 4 of his older brothers had died, so he was feared for his life from assassins or from the English army. And also, his army was getting killed. At every turn, they were getting crushed by the English. And so he really, was trying to figure out what to do when all of a sudden this woman comes and she starts claiming that she's legit. Well, there's a historical story that historians are sort of like 50-50 on whether this happened. But what he did was he dressed up like his tailor, and he had his tailor dress up like him, and they staged a party. And they had Joan come in, and they said to her, if you really are who you say you are, pick out your king. And so there was a man that was clearly dressed like he was a king, the Dauphin, but it wasn't. It was the tailor. The tailor and the real Dauphin had switched their clothes, and he was walking around like he was a servant. And he went over and he offered her some food, and she said, "I would never have my king serve me," and kneeled before him. And so supposedly this was the test that she passed to be given an army. So, he gives this, 18-year-old girl an army, which is, almost unheard of. But her first goal is to go to the French city of Orleans. Our city in the United States, New Orleans, or New Orleans, is named after the French city of Orleans. And the siege there that the English had was 5 months long, and she broke the siege. Not only did she get past the people that were laying siege to the city to get into it, but then she also broke the siege in only 9 days, and she won battle after battle after battle. She was actually nicknamed the Maid of Orleans because she saved that city from the English, and historical accounts have her as preferring her standard over her sword. She has many quotes saying that she never actually killed a man, that she just inspired her troops to do so and led the troops into battle, which is interesting. She did receive many battle wounds. One was nearly fatal. It was an arrow wound to her lower neck. Fortunately, it did not hit any major arteries, and it was close enough to her collarbone that it did not penetrate as far as a normal arrow would, and she did keep fighting. She did make France safe enough for the Dauphin to travel to Reims, Reims, which is where the Cathedral of Notre Dame is located, to be coronated. So he does end up becoming the King of France due to Joan of Arc's help. I found this primary source that says after years of one humiliating defeat after another, both the military and civil leadership of France were demoralized and discredited. And when the Dauphin Charles granted Joan's urgent request to be equipped for war and placed at the head of his large army, his decision must have been based in large part on the knowledge that every rational option had been tried and had failed. Only a regime in the final straits of desperation would pay any heed to an illiterate farm girl who claimed that the voice of God was instructing her to take charge of her country's army and lead it to victory. And if you think about it, really, it does make sense. I mean, you'd have to be very, very desperate to believe this girl who cannot read, who cannot write, who has no military training is going to be leading your army. There's statues all over Europe and some in the United States of Joan of Arc carrying her standard. And she did lift morale. And what morale is like the your men's psyche and their attitude and their belief that they can win. And morale is something that Joan would raise because she would lead the troops into battle. And a lot of the men figured, if this young girl is able to go into danger, I think we should be able to go too. Joan was captured, though. What had happened was that she was organizing a withdrawal from the battlefield, and she was captured by, and she was protecting the rear of the actual army to make sure that they weren't, the British didn't sneak up behind them. And she actually was overrun and captured by British allies known as the Burgundians, and they took her and they sold her to the English. She was given an inquisition, a church trial, and the family had a chance. Her family had a chance to buy her freedom, but they couldn't afford it. So they appealed to the French king, Charles, who did have the money. And you'll never guess what Charles did? Because he owes her pretty much his crown. He declined the request. He sold her out. So she did attempt to escape on her own. This tower is a 70-foot high tower, and she actually jumped from a window, which the window does not exist anymore in this tower, but she fell 70 feet to a dry moat bed, and she actually sustained no injuries falling 70 feet. Must have just been the way that she landed. The moat bed must have been very soft, and she actually was captured right away. The trial was very interesting. The Catholic Church and the Inquisition kept very detailed documents, and so her entire trial was written down word for word, and all the testimony can be found. And it's very interesting how this illiterate farm girl outsmarted the probably most educated people of the time, cardinals, at every turn. The guy's name was Cardinal Winchester, and he led the prosecution, and Joan provided witty answers every time. One of the most famous questions he asked her, because there are many dialects of the French language, he had said to her, in which dialect do your voices speak? Did they speak in French? Did they speak in English? Did they speak in, a different version of French or English? And she had a beautiful stick it back to him. She said, in one much better than yours. Take that, Cardinal Winchester. Also, there was another very interesting trick question. When asked if she knew if she was in God's grace, she answered, and this is great, if I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. And the reason why this question is a trap is the church doctrine says that no one can be certain if they're in God's grace. So if she had answered yes, she would have convicted herself of heresy. But if she'd answered no, then she would have convinced her own guilt. So now that you know that this is a trap, look at the question again. Are you in God's grace? And look, it's such a beautiful answer. She says, if I'm not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. What a great way to answer. And after she answered this, a court official later testified that those who were interrogating her were stupefied. They couldn't believe that she was able to answer these trick questions in this manner. Joan was illiterate. She could barely write, but she was a very good speaker. So she had her letters written while she was in jail to the French dictated. She did learn how to sign her name, and here's a copy of what her name looked like. Historian Stephen Ritchie, a primary source, says that the people who came after her in the 5 centuries since her death tried to make her all kinds of things: a demonic fanatic, spiritual mystic, naive, adored heroine, and a saint. She insisted, even when threatened with torture and faced with death by fire, that she was guided by voices from God. Voices or no voices, her achievements leave anyone who knows her story shaking his head in amazed wonder. Just take the religion out of it, folks. Let's just say that, the voices weren't coming, wasn't God, wasn't saints or whatever. An illiterate farm girl led a successful military campaign against, hard, battle-hardened English soldiers. That's just amazing in itself. That part is true. Now, whether the voices were coming, obviously, that's up for religious debate, and whether there was some type of divine intervention from God or whatever. But it's very cool story about Joan of Arc. So she was found guilty and she was sentenced to burn. They did give her multiple chances to recant her voices and deny them and spare her life, but she would not deny the voices. She said, they're happening. I am not going to lie. So she was burned at the stake, tied to a wooden stake and burned. She did ask if a cross could be held for her to see as she died, and as you can see, this man obliged that request. Once she died, when they burned her, the English had a little bit of overkill with her. They raked back the coals to prove that she was dead. They burned her 2 more times to prevent any gathering of relics, like any bones or any clothing or whatever. Then they took her ashes and they threw them into the Seine River, which, as you can see, is in the northern part of France there. So around 12 o'clock, you can see the Seine River. So there would be no grave. They didn't want her to become a martyr. They didn't want people, using her grave or her remains as a rallying cry against the English. Her last words were, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. 22 years after Joan's death, the French were so inspired, including Charles, that they ended up kicking the English off of mainland Europe. And I guess if you had to pick a winner of the 100 Years' War, it would be the French, because they kicked the English out of France. Thanks to Joan of Arc and her inspiration. She does have a very famous quote that I do like, and I wanted to read it to you before I talk about Joan of Arc's influence on the United States. Here's her quote. One life is all we have, and we live it as we believe in living it. But to sacrifice what you are and to live without belief, that is a fate more terrible than dying. Her likeness has been used here in the United States. You can see this is a World War I military propaganda poster. It says, Joan of Arc saved France, women of America, save your country by buying war-saving stamps. Another famous quote from Joan of Arc, I'm not afraid, I was born for this. Some attempts at humor, Joan of Arc, you can't fire me, I quit. The glass ceiling in the business world is supposedly this invisible ceiling that stops women from getting to the top, so this is why it would be funny, oh no, it's Joan of Arc bringing the glass ceiling. There's a kind of welding called arc welding, and so you can see this lady's company is called Hello Joan of Arc Welding. And lastly, I like this because this is usually what happens at my house. I make stuff up, and then the kids come and tell me I'm wrong. And this little girl saying to her dad, "My teacher says you're wrong. Joan of Arc was not Noah's wife, like Noah's Ark. Get it? Ha ha ha." Right, that's it. Oh, that's scary. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for watching.